former advisor to David Cameron, Phillip Blond, a man who gives a great deal of thought to what the Conservatives are really all about. And Phillip, what I wanted to ask you first of all is to tie together this decision by Rishi Sunak that he will not go to COP27 with the briefing that's coming out on the autumn statement and the need for tough and, as Jeremy Hunt put it, even embarrassing decisions have to be made. Is an image of Sunak Toryism beginning to emerge?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that what we're seeing for not going to COP27 is the focus on the domestic issue, also propagating the idea that we're in an emergency that requires an emergency response. And I think to be fair to the Prime Minister, he started very well. We get a sense of competence, a sense of serious engagement, and a sense of priority. And so I think he's playing the opening hands of this card game extremely well. And what we're going to see are, I think, a whole series of movements on tax and spend that they hope will both speak to the 2019 manifesto, put a bottom under the recent fall in the markets, which they've already done, but then put policy behind it so that the problems don't return. And that's what we're seeing, really.
Taxation thing, and I reminded folk at the beginning of our conversation that you worked very, very closely with David Cameron way back when, and Dave and George Osborne were both very, very keen on big personal allowances because it sent out a vital signal, even to the poorest, that if you work and earn a little bit more with a big allowance, you will pay less tax. You can earn another 500 grand, whatever it might be, without paying a penny on income tax. The briefings at the moment are that it is quite likely that Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak will continue the freeze in those allowances, so more people will drift into paying tax and more people also will drift into paying higher rates of tax. In my mind, that is a dreadful signal to be sending out by a new Tory Prime Minister.
Well, we've had fiscal drag, which I think is the term for the high tax allowances since Cameron and Osborne. Though they did raise the level at which you start paying taxes for the very poorest. It's really a political decision. That's why I think the debate around the windfall tax is interesting, because when Sunak introduced the windfall tax back in May, he had a tax break with it, which is you can discount the investment that you put into energy against and set that against any putative windfall tax. The impact of that, given the investment plans are already going on, is none of the big energy companies will pay any windfall tax this year, and then a small amount next year. So I think this burden needs to be shared. And under trust, we had an extreme ideological point of view that any profit, no matter merited or unmerited, shouldn't be touched. And I really do hope we have a sensible and serious windfall tax, which is a tax on profits that you weren't planning for, that come from activities that aren't to do with yourself. They're an unexpected benefit. So we can distribute those profits to the whole community. And the chief executive BP, when asked which of your planned investments for the years to come will be cancelled if we have a windfall tax, said none of them. They're practically begging us to tax them and to lower the burden. And I just hope Sunak breaks with Truss's kind of ideology and then spreads that burden more fairly across all taxpayers, both business and private.
Yeah, and let me, just before I come to my final question, underlining that key point you made, is you can raise taxes, but you can let people off if they do the right thing, i.e. invest in other forms of energy and show that they're doing something good with those huge profits rather than simply chucking them at shareholders. My final question is this, and to me it's also crucial about defining Sunak Toryism and who he really is aiming at. The triple lock on pensions is clearly in play. And an awful lot of folk that I talk to say if they stand by it, that's securing the traditional blue rinse brigade who vote Tory. And it really is signalling to young voters, actually, do you know, we haven't got a great deal for you because we've got to make sure that our old voters are still with us. Tactically, strategically, very inept, Philip.
Yeah, and we've got a problem that for every pensioner living in poverty in this country, there's a pensioner who's a millionaire. There's roughly half of our pensioners are extremely well off indeed. And we haven't been able to help those who aren't well off, and we give the same amounts to both. And that's foolish. And particularly, and you put your finger on the point of generations, the level at which the majority start voting Conservative has now risen to 57. You know, and it was in the 40s even 10 years ago. So what we are finding is a whole generation of people, not just young people, but people setting up families and having children, are being excluded from the goods of society. And conservatism has to deal with the issue of distribution. We have a distributional system that doesn't work, that is setting up barriers for capitalism to advance all, for distributing assets to all. And we're becoming a monopoly, oligopoly, plutocratic, there's 3 words for you, society. And that isn't a society that can prosper. And that settlement will essentially create an unbalanced society. And that's really what conservatism needs to tackle. And we can judge that on the budgetary statement on November the 17th, and we can have that discussion then.